from the gardens of ancient Mesopotamia to the fields of modern-day industrial farms. We've been producing food for millennia, but today's patterns of consumption and production are harming people and the planet. On this edition of Eco India, we explore efforts underway to help fix our broken food system. Hello and welcome, I'm Sanuta Raghu. Food waste is one example of just how broken the system is. While billions of people remain underfed, more than 1/3 of the food produced globally goes to waste. Here in India, an estimated 40% is discarded. We visited a Delhi-based startup that's rescuing food destined for the dump by transforming it into feed for animals.
It's feeding time on his dairy farm in Ambala in the state of Haryana. Farmer Chandra Mohan has been in the business for 40 years. He's mindful that his cows get nutritious diet. The healthier and stronger the animals, the better and more abundant the milk yield.
We used to feed them grains, but now we have access to a good feed supply. We get more milk using it, and it keeps our animals healthy.
This fodder is special. It's made from food waste processed by the Delhi-based startup Wasteland. The company collects leftover food that it gets free of charge, and that would otherwise be discarded from 700 locations in more than 50 cities across India. The company says that makes it the largest food recycler in the country.
Food waste is one of the largest waste segments in India. And if you see the last 50 years, there has been work that has happened in plastics recycling, electronic waste recycling. But when it comes to food waste, it has not seen any innovation in the last 30 years. The solution, the most popular solution to food waste that is like most accepted form is composting or biogas.
But composting was an unsatisfactory solution for a snack manufacturer, to be honest. The company began producing healthy snacks from vegetables 4 years ago. Demand is high, and as production has increased, so too has the quantity of its nutrient-packed scraps.
If I talk about during our initial days, since the volume was not that high, so the wastage was very less. But now that we are playing in the volumes, now that 5%, 6% is enough volume, and which has to be recycled or mitigated or maybe put into the best use that we can do.
The company now passes its damaged goods onto Wasteling. That saves the snack producer disposal costs and supplies Wasteling with more of the raw materials it needs for its feed production. Noodles or potatoes are sold directly to farmers as pig feed. Most other food waste is dried and ground. It's then packaged and delivered to animal feed producers.
When the material arrives to the facility, it is offloaded. We weigh it by category to make sure that we are accurately aware of what quantity or what category we have. That is punched into the inventory that we receive, and depending on the nutritional formulation of the product that we have picked, we would decide what is the end goal, whether it goes into cattle, poultry, aqua or swine. And then we prepare formulation mixes.
But the recycling of leftover food is still the exception in India, even though it saves money and protects the environment. Most waste is simply left to rot. As it decomposes, it consumes oxygen and releases methane, a powerful greenhouse gas, or GHG for short.
So for example, if food loss and waste was a country, it would have been the third largest carbon emitter, like GHG emitter, only after China and USA. So if you look at the problem, it's huge, and there is a lot of potential to reduce food loss and waste and all the emissions and everything that goes into its inputs.
Food producers aren't solely to blame for the mountains of food waste. 40% of the food produced in India is lost due to inefficient supply chains. Huge quantities spoil as a result of long transport routes and inadequate refrigeration. Social habits also play a role.
For example, in India, in some cultures, they prefer food left. Otherwise, it's like they've not made enough. So they would want that there's still food on the table, but that can be taken care of, right? But that's again a cultural issue.
Converting food waste into animal fodder is one way to limit the garbage. To date, Wastelink has processed 5,000 tons, and the market is growing. With almost 540 million animals, India has the largest livestock population in the world. Demand for dry feed is greater than the available supply. That's why feed manufacturer Shahi has been buying additional feed from Wastelink for the past 4 years to save on corn and grain costs.
In noodles, there is an oil also. If you are going to check the nutrition value, na? In maize we are going to get the energy. In pasta or noodles we are getting the oil value and the energy value. Both of them we are getting.
Its nutritional value makes the feed a winning solution for Chandra Mohan. The farmer's animals are healthy and happy, and the fodder is cheaper than conventional bronze.
Well, as that report shows, food waste for many of us is an invisible process that doesn't start in our kitchens when we throw out uneaten leftovers or spoiled produce. It begins out on the farms and in the fields where food is produced. That's where an organization in Spain is focusing its efforts. It harvests perfectly edible fruit and vegetable rejects and delivers them to food banks, adding nutritional value to handouts for the needy.
It's all hands on deck in this spinach field just outside Barcelona. Ana Gras and a team of volunteers are collecting all they can today. Their efforts will supply many needy people in the region with fresh food.
Wow, there's so much. I can't really gauge how much, but it should be enough to feed 100 families, or even more.
Ana Gras works for the Espigoladors, the gleaners. The non-profit organization collects leftover crops after the commercial harvest on many fields in Spain's Catalonia region. This practice was more common before industrialized farming and the introduction of strict regulations. Now it has been revived here by the Espigoladors. Around 8% of the world's crops are believed to be lost at harvest time. In the European Union, fruit and vegetables are rejected if they're too big or small and don't comply with appearance standards.
We're in a field of spinach that hasn't been sold on the market because there was not enough demand for it. So if we wouldn't be harvesting the spinach, it would go to waste. The farmer would simply plow through the field here with his tractor to prepare it for the next harvest. So what we're doing here is removing the spinach to give it a second opportunity.
Last year alone, her organization saved over 600,000 kilos of fruit and vegetables. In this way, the water and CO2 emissions invested in their growth were not in vain. The rescued produce arrives in this warehouse. It's then distributed to charities across the region. Amid the economic fallout from the pandemic, demand at Spain's food banks has at times doubled. Now rising prices and economic uncertainty caused by the war in Ukraine are putting more pressure on the vulnerable. Carolina Bonafonte coordinates the deliveries at the warehouse in Barcelona's port.
The people who are most in need have the poorest diet, because in the end, the cost of food determines what they eat. Ensuring that they're supplied with a minimum of high-quality, basic produce is very important for these people's health.
The volunteers' activities helped build momentum for the drafting of a regional bill to prevent food loss and waste. Recently passed, the legislation promotes the practice of gleaning as a solution. A similar law will come into force nationwide. Espigoladors founder Mireia Barba is proud of that. She started the organization in 2014. Now she also runs an operation on the outskirts of Barcelona that produces its own brand of preserves, made from food that otherwise would be thrown away. Today, they're cooking a pumpkin recipe and applesauce. People who work here come from disadvantaged backgrounds and have struggled with exclusion.
This is only a small factory. But unlike in an industrial-sized factory, people who work here get the chance to try their hand at different jobs in every step of the production process. They can prepare fruit and vegetables and cook them. They can learn how to can them or how to ration them.
It's a springboard to future job opportunities. Catalina Morales moved from Honduras to Spain, hoping for a better future. For years she struggled. Her job here is a lifeline. Mireia Barba and her team helped her obtain the work permits she never had before. Now she has a steady income.
As an immigrant, you don't have a lot of opportunities to work. You either work on an hourly basis without a contract, and they don't pay you the same, or you just take any job, whatever comes up. Without documents, it's all very complicated. Not only for me, but also for my daughter. I almost gave up and went back to Honduras.
In the past few years, around 50 people found a job here. Financing is generated through the sales of the preserves and state funding. Though Mireia Barba needs more soon, she wants to expand.
We created a social business model that has three aims: the reduction of food loss, mainly of vegetables and fruits, the right to healthy nutrition for everyone, but especially for those in a vulnerable situation. And we also wanted to offer job opportunities for these people. We're promoting this project as a model that can work not only on a national scale, but also internationally. Because in every city there are these three necessities, which are the reason we exist.
An existence that depends on plenty of helping hands. The people here are happy to be contributing to a circular economy and social justice.
In the long run, our goal is to disappear. But that would only happen if the problem of food loss and the other social challenges we face were solved. So that might be a bit utopian.
The gleaners of Barcelona are likely to have their work cut out for years to come, because there are still plenty of fields with an abundance to share.
Scientists say the global food system is hurling the planet towards a climate disaster, not least because it's responsible for a third of all greenhouse gas emissions. Cattle and other livestock produce the same amount of carbon emissions as the combined output of all the world's vehicles, trains, ships and airplanes. Many people have quit meat with the aim of reducing their individual footprint. But as our reporter discovered, dairy products have similar effects on the environment, though there may be palate-pleasing alternatives.
To make cheese, you need milk, and to make milk, you need animals that emit loads of greenhouse gas emissions and use lots and lots of water.
I mean, I really love cheese, but we need to talk about it. How hard is this piece of art really on the environment? Do I need to stop eating cheese, and are the alternatives any better?
And the best way to find out, make some cheese yourself. Cheesemakers Paul and Euler have agreed to let me look over their shoulder for the day. Paul used to work for large-scale dairy operations, but gave it up to create his own cheese. And here comes the milk. We just need a couple of minutes for about 250 liters.
How many liters do you actually need to make 1 kilogram of cheese?
That depends on the cheese recipe, so it also depends on the composition of the milk. We're quite lucky here. We are working with milk from Jersey cows. These cows produce milk with very high solids.
The amount of milk that is used is actually extremely important, because depending on which study you're looking at, between 80 and 95% of cheese's greenhouse gas emissions come from the milk. So the more milk you use, the worse for the planet.
More than half of those emissions come from the farming process, because cows and other milk-producing animals fart and breathe out methane, a gas that is 84 times more potent than CO2 at heating the planet.
But milks from different kind of animals have different carbon footprints.
Cow and buffalo milk have the lowest, with 2.8 and 3.4 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of milk. Goat and sheep milk's impact is more than double that, with 5.2 and 8.4 kilograms of CO2.
So bigger animals pollute the planet less per kilogram of milk. That's because cows or buffaloes just produce more milk than a goat or sheep, for example.
And because all these animals are ruminants and pump out methane, cheese's carbon footprint is actually bigger than that of poultry and even pork. More emissions than meat? That is absolutely insane. But anyway, now that we got the milk, we need to heat it up and add some bacteria. The goal today, turning this into a yummy soft cheese. What we're starting here is a process called fermentation. The bacteria feast on the sugar that's in the milk and break it down. After a while, we add a liquid called rennet. This is what turns our concoction into cheese, as it restructures the casein in it, a protein that can only be found in animals' milk. And yes, it really works. Our milk is suddenly solid. Just for me to cut it into pieces again.
And suddenly you realize that 200 liters of milk can be quite heavy. Scoop.
Now we have to work quickly. The curd needs to go into these molds while it's still warm and be flipped after a couple of minutes. After another 2 or 3 hours, all of these molds go into the ripening room, a cheesemaker's treasure chamber. The processing accounts for between 2 to 18% of cheese's final CO2 emissions. But of course, the longer you need to keep it at a certain temperature and humidity for it to become really tasty, the more energy it uses. New day, another cheesemaker, but today we're producing the vegan alternative. And here cashews are the main ingredient.
That's the wonderful thing about cashews. We can make a nice milk from them. We soak them, clean them, and crush them. This produces a smooth milk that can be processed into cheese alternatives the way animal milk would be for normal cheese production.
And after I've ground down all these cashews, bacteria cultures will be added to start the fermentation process, just like you would when making cheese from animal milk.
There are all sorts of ingredients for cheese alternatives. Cashews, almonds, oats, soy, and even olive oil. And because of all these different ingredients and an abundance of different recipes, it's quite hard to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions, water and land use of vegan cheese alternatives.
Vegan cheeses are fairly new, so there aren't a lot of studies on their environmental impact yet, which is why we can only compare what it takes to grow the most popular ingredients: cashews, almonds, and the new kid on the block, oats. The Dutch National Institute for Public Health and the Environment compared different environmental impacts. Other studies claim different impacts, but for easy comparison, I'm sticking to this one. Making cheese emits way more CO2 than vegan alternatives. Once the bacteria have started their work during the fermentation process, the herbs and spices are added. This version is what the company calls chakalaka. To become as delicious as possible, it goes through a similar ripening process as real cheese, where the bacteria continue their work. Looking at the science though, it takes quite a lot of water to grow cashews. The Dutch study found water consumption to be as high as 2,000 liters per kilogram of cashews. But it's not just the number that's important. The impact depends a lot on the region where the cashews are grown. Does it rain a lot, or is it a water-scarce region, for example? In Vietnam, cashews are mainly grown in areas with relatively little water stress, but the opposite is generally true for Brazil or Burkina Faso. Alrighty, and now I'm really curious how that is going to taste.
Oh, yeah, it has, you smell and taste a lot of herbs. The consistency is actually pretty similar to like cream cheese, but with the herbs and stuff. It's really, really great. All right. That was pretty good, even for a cheese lover. But if you want to go full out on saving the planet, go for oat-based options. But they are just starting to hit the supermarket shelves now.
Real cheese will always be my #1, but I'll try to switch it up with some tasty alternatives.
So if we can't eat meat or dairy, what can we eat to save the climate and ensure food security? Bugs may be the answer. Pioneers all over the world are developing sustainable products made out of the larvae of black soldier flies. In Germany, it seems there's just one sticking point standing in the way of its success: the red tape of bureaucracy.
It could be so easy. Breeding harmless little flies to lay eggs, which turn into maggots with a voracious appetite for food waste. And the larvae can be turned into tasty, high-protein burgers. Good for the climate and the environment, though it's not quite that straightforward yet. But first things first. Welcome to the love shack of the black soldier fly, a creature by the name Hermetia elucens. Heinrich Katz is a superstar among fly farmers. He'd love to expand his farm and be part of the insect protein revolution. And the larvae are up to the job. They have a voracious appetite and gobble up everything from food waste to animal excrement. In true glutton fashion, their body weight increases 6,000-fold in just 3 weeks. The problem is, EU regulations forbid the farmer from feeding them food waste.
If you're a pioneer doing something new, you're going to really enjoy what you're doing and be enthusiastic about it. But often you do bump into challenges, especially in the case of disruptive innovation. You might find yourself facing regulatory hurdles.
The EU is concerned about the sanitary conditions of the larvae, which live in their own feed and feces.
Insects live in their feed. They live in their own feed. So you have to make sure that there is no risk of contamination between the feed in which they live and the insect protein, which is the final product and which would be consumed.
This is why they're currently fed on pig feed.
This up here is okara, which is great for our young larvae. Okara is a byproduct of tofu production.
But there are more efficient solutions available, like in Kenya, where Heinrich Katz has also set up a fly farm. With indoor plumbing a rarity in many poorer districts, a startup has set up portable lavatories in selected places. The excrement is later collected and mixed with food waste, a blend that's perfectly suited to the black soldier fly larvae.
The larvae are then fed to pigs and chickens. We've had this system up and running for a couple of years now with 0 problems and no cases of animals getting sick.
Despite its concerns, the EU says it wants to promote larvae farming, which could be a sustainable source of protein and a meat substitute. Nearly 100% of the maggots can be consumed, either by livestock or humans. There's far less waste than when pigs, chickens, or cows are on the dinner plate. Plus, the maggots' shells can be used as a fertilizer or for making cosmetic products and even medication.
You know that the European Union has adopted an action plan for a circular economy, and we have adopted the farm-to-fork strategy, where we want to develop resilient and sustainable food supply chains. And one of the things which are being assessed there is whether new feed substrates for insects focused on former foodstuffs could be considered as a source of feed for insects.
Before waste can be used this way, the EU wants proof that it's a safe product.
We know that we need to deliver empirical evidence that it's safe. But the EU is basically making that impossible because they won't grant us an exemption. So we're being asked to provide evidence while being denied the means to do so. We can only hope that we'll be granted exemptions at the local level and that the EU doesn't put a spanner in the works.
For now, Heinrich Katz's ground fly larvae can only be fed to dogs and fish. But if all goes well, larvae could be the next big thing in the food industry.
Food has cultural, religious, and societal layers plastered on it. And it may not be possible for all of us to make the switch to sustainable alternatives immediately. But the solution to every problem starts with an acknowledgement from each one of us that the way we produce food today is broken. Change begins here. Think about that, and I'll see you again next week. Goodbye, and thanks for watching.